Happy cold day wherever you are. Man, it seems like a lot of the country has been hit with this cold weather, including us. And not that we're comparing, but we can compare. Here, 2 days ago, the air temperature, not the feels like or wind chill that we used to call it, the air temperature was 25 degrees below zero. So it's pretty balmy. It was pretty balmy yesterday because we were 38 degrees warmer than that. And it's not quite as balmy today, but spring is right around the corner. And of course, we're not here to talk about weather. We're here to talk about finishing and grain filler. Here's what I'm going to say about grain filler. It's only in my decades of woodworking, it's only relatively recently that I started using grain filler. And I think you may find what I found, which is you don't know what you're missing until you start adding grain filler to your finishing steps. It's not a hard thing to do. I'm going to show you how to do it here. But the difference, the deal with grain filler is that it's just what it sounds like. It fills the grain. When you're working with a wood that's open grained, I'm going to work with red oak today. It's a great example of that. Mahogany is another example. What you may have found is that when you get a top coat on that material, you sanded it, you did your due diligence on the sanding side of the world, and you did a great job getting a finish on it. But when you pull your fingers across it, despite all that work, or kind of because of all that work, you've got these high and low spots. And I say because of all that work, because sanding is part of the culprit. We sand it flat, but we never get it dead flat when it's a open grain wood because we're still getting those highs and lows. And those telegraph through your finish. And as a result, when you're done, you don't have a nice smooth surface. The benefit to grain filler is that it fills those lows. It's invisible. Your top coat is never going to know it's there. And the difference that we get is more like a mirror smooth finish instead of those peaks and valleys. I'm going to bring you in like I always do. I'm going to zoom you in on a second camera, and I'm going to do my best to show you kind of the before and after, the difference of what you get if you don't use it and what you get when you do use it. But I recognize that it's going to be difficult with lighting and camera and stuff for you to see what I can feel here, but I'll do the best I can. 100,000 foot view. The stuff I like the bestest is this stuff. Both products I'm going to show you are sourced in the description. Specifically, this is Aqua Coat Clear. I'm separating that from the other product I'm going to show you in a little bit. So this is what I would use on a project where I'm going to put stain on it or a clear top coat. So this is clear. It's not going to show through my finish. Other than giving us a flatter surface, you're not going to know it's there. It's a water-based product. It's very easy to work with. It's very easy to manipulate. One of my big things with this was a red oak table that's in my house, the dining room table, and the surface of that was maybe one of the first places I've used this stuff, and it really did a nice job of the leveling that I was talking about earlier. The other stuff I'm going to use is this one, still Aqua Coat, but this is one that you'll paint over, and I'll show you why we're doing this, the difference between the two products when we get to this. So first off, let's justify what we're doing. I got a cheat sheet on the back of my boards. So I've got here a red oak plywood that does not have grain filler on it, and the same piece that does have grain filler on it, and then a top coat over it. So let's switch cameras here, and I'm going to see if I can convince you. Let's see how I do with my camera work. This is the one that does not have grain filler on it. And this is maybe the kind of thing that you're used to. See how when you look at this in kind of a glancing light, it's got those highs and lows across the grain. And certainly when I run my fingers across this, I can feel it. The finish is smooth. The oak plywood was sanded smooth, but we're left with these high and low spots. There, you can really see them, I think, right there. We're left with those high and low spots. When we add grain filler to the equation, same plywood, same top coat, but here, again, I can really feel it. And when we look across the grain, we don't have those high and low spots anymore because the filler has done what it's supposed to do. It has filled. And by filling in those low spots, when the top coat comes over the top, we now have a nice level surface. Let's look at, if you're doing this, how you're going to do it. I have in my hot little hands a piece of red oak plywood. Again, our choice for this is the clear. Now, don't get thrown off when you open this. It's got a little bit of a color to it, but that's not going to affect our finish here. The consistency of this stuff is a little thicker than like a Vaseline, a petroleum jelly, but not too much. And that's nice because the way that we put this on is we spread it with this gizmo. So its workability is really, really good. Here's how I do this. Get some on your knife. And in my first step, I'm going to pull this across the grain. And I'm pushing down pretty hard. I want to embed this in the grain of the wood. And that being said, this isn't auto body work on a car. So what we're trying not to do is leave a boatload of grain filler sitting on the surface, because that'll just make for more work later. Drying time on this stuff is around 45 minutes or so. So I'm working fairly quickly. When I did that big tabletop, the tabletop is 36 by 72. I did it in subsections to make sure that it didn't get away from me. Because I'm going to do this, I'm going to work across the grain to embed it. Then we want to squeegee off. We want to kind of ride the high spots and take off any excess on the surface. Like that. And see how I'm holding this very vertical. So I'm squeegeeing that off. And then that stuff can go right back in there. Put the lid back on so that doesn't dry out. And it's water-based. The filler is water-based. So if I had a sink right here, I would wash that, but I don't have a sink right here, so I'm just going to wipe that off, and then I'll wash it later. But there a couple things are key here. Pulling across the grain to make sure you get in the grain. Squeegeeing in this direction to eliminate the whatever's laying on top here. You don't want puddles of grain filler. If it happens that it gets away from you and there are grain filler high spots, it's not a deal breaker. You can sand those down. I just don't want you to have to do any more sanding than you have to do. So looking at this now, you can see it looks wet from the grain filler, but there aren't any piles of that grain filler left on it. That's going to take about 45 minutes-ish to dry. Then from there, you got to see, well, did that one coat do it? And in this red oak, probably not. It's probably going to take 2, maybe 3 coats to get it to where, through the magic of working ahead, it's like this. This one has 3 coats on it. In between coats, I'm sanding with 320, 400 grit, and it's just very, very light. You don't have to work hard to sand the stuff down. So first coat dries, scuff it. Second coat, same procedure. Second coat dries, see what you got. So the difference between this, which has grain filler on it, and this, which does not, they were both sanded to 220 before I started. I can still feel those highs and lows here. Here, after 3 coats, I can't. That's what tells me I'm ready for finish. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump on my iPad, not like jump on it because that would break it, but I'm going to look at my iPad. Hashtag dad jokes. I'm going to look at my iPad and see if you have questions. And if not, we'll get finish on those boards I have grain filler. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'll get you back on the other camera again, and I have ready boiled linseed oil. And the reason I'm using boiled linseed oil for this is it's so easy to apply. I can wipe it on, and most of my finishing is done with spraying. I spray my top coats on with a Turbine HVLP. I'm not going to do that now. So I'll wipe linseed oil onto a board that does not have grain filler on it, and a board that does have grain filler on it. And then again, hopefully on that other camera, you'll be able to see right away what the difference is. And then there are a couple things we still have to talk about. What if we're staining the board? What if we have a paint grade project? So there's some more stuff still coming at you. So let me get organized. We've got untreated, we've got treated, we've got linseed oil, we've got paper towels. Here we go back to the other camera. So my hope is this linseed oil has got such a amber to it that helps you see what I can feel. But on this one, I looking in my monitor here, when you look at this, you can see those highs and lows in the unfilled one. That's unfilled. That's filled. And there's a visible difference already between those two. Again, 3 coats of grain filler on this one. So let's get some finish on there and see if that makes it accentuate the lows and the highs. Did I say that right? Let's get some linseed oil on there. And again, I keep talking about feeling the grain. And when I do this, all of those highs and lows are telegraphing through. And let's see what we get here. There. See them there, the peaks and the valleys. And I don't mean just the cathedrals. That's a different thing. That's the grain pattern. But when you look at it at an angle like that, you can see the high and the low in the grain. Then this is the one that's got 3 coats of grain filler on it. Now, one of the things that's changing here, one of the things that'll look different is that in that case, the linseed oil went right onto the raw wood. So its amber tone is soaking in, and that results in a little bit different finish look between these two. It's just something you need to know about. Because we've got grain filler on here, the amber is not soaking in and giving us the amber in the oak that we got there. But let's do this now. Get in the right spot. And this one looks flatter. And then again, when I do this, it feels flatter. Now I messed up my finish. So this is where, if I were just, when I was finishing that big dining room table, what I'm doing is I've got lights at a low angle, always when I'm finishing. So you get glancing light across the project, and you get down there and you look at it to see what your finish looks like. And if we do that with this one, trying to see if I can get it to show for you. When we do that with this one here, looking at my studio light, I can see, again, all those highs and lows in the grain. When I do it with this one, it's a skating rink. It's just dead flat. All right. Preguntas? So Curtis asks, do you stain the wood before you fill? I'm going to come back. Give me 1 second. I'm going to come back to that. It's the next thing I'm going to talk about. Ronald, are there any top coats that should not be used with grain filler? I don't think so. So in my case, I'm water-based top coat over a water-based grain filler. But as long as you let the grain filler dry, you shouldn't have any contraindications between grain filler and top coat. What I would do, just if you're going to get the aqua coat stuff, give them a call and double check that. When you know your top coat, I'm about to use wipe on polyurethane from Minwax. Can I put that over the aqua coat? And I can't imagine. I'm confident you're going to be fine, but it's always tough with finishing to give too much advice, just in case something goes south. So just give AquaCode a call and ask them. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be universally compatible. Laird says, can this be used when turning to get a smoother finish on a bowl or pen? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, same. I'm thinking I do quite a bit of turning. So go through the same steps, turn it, sand it, grain fill it, wipe it, squeegee off the surface, sand it 320, and then put your top coat on. Yeah, it give you the same result. All right, let's get to Curtis and staining and how this all works out. Do you stain before or after? Yes. So you can do this a couple different ways. In this case, this oak was stained with a water-based stain. It was stained with this warm oak water-based stuff. So the sequence of events on this one was stain the oak, then one of my finishing go-tos, seal coat, which is just de-wax shellac. So I did the water-based stain, then I did the seal coat over the top of it, then the grain filler over the seal coat. What I get from that is, remember, we have here a water-based product. We have here, where am I? A water-based product. We want to make sure that when we're applying the grain filler over the stain, we're not pulling the stain off with the grain filler. This sequence of staining, de-wax shellac, grain filler guarantees that we're not going to affect the stain. It works out great for me because de-wax shellac is my go-to seal coat anyway. Remember that one of the things that happened here is we have a little bit different tone on this oak from the boiled linseed oil than we do on this one, this one was raw, this one had the grain filler on it. So similarly, if you are going to use a solvent-based stain, you could do the solvent-based stain, let it completely dry, and then go straight to grain filler. Or you can grain fill, scuff sand, and then stain. And in that case, the stain becomes almost a little more like a toner than a stain, because we're going to color the grain fill when we scuff it. We're opening it up with scuffing it so we're giving it color, but it's not going to soak into the wood. So it's going to give you two different results, very similar to what happened here. All of this comes down to you stop in New York City and you say, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And the answer is practice, practice, practice. So same, you got to practice this stuff on scrap before you use it on a project. I have got multiple pieces just like this laying around the shop where I have messed with different combos. because let's do like a rule is water-based stain, shellac, then grain filler, so you don't pull the water-based stain. But it's not a rule that you have to shellac over solvent-based stain. It's not a rule that you have to stain before you grain fill or you have to stain after you grain fill. So in those cases, you want to experiment and look at the results, because different sequences are going to give you different results. Checking for questions again. Marguerite asks, does the grain filler wear over time? Good question, but no, because we're still top coating. The grain filler is just it's like a substrate. The grain filler is underneath whatever we're finishing it with. So your final top coat is still going to be your final top coat. Your durability, like dining room table, comes from what you're using as a top coat. How about applying to an uneven, not flat surface? How would you apply this? So great question. And I have for you a little door that we're going to look at. So give me a second and I'll get to that. All right. So let's do that now. Let me clear the decks. I'll be very good at spilling boiled linseed oil all over my bench. Now, on this door, this is very standard Copen style construction. As a result, there's an OG profile on the inside of the frame. Let's get you back. On a tight camera. With this, it's just like what we already did, but different. We're on raw wood that we're going to use a clear sealer on, so we're still using the clear. And I'm grabbing a paper towel because I forgot to bring a small sponge over here, but a small sponge would be the way to do this. We just need something that's going to conform to that OG. So instead of trying to use a squeegee, I've got it on the paper towel. This is going to work fine. And then I'm wiping it in and using finger pressure to push it into that detail. And of course, go all the way around. And then I'm going to grab part of the paper towel or a part of the sponge that doesn't have grain filler on it and do this to get the excess off the surface. Same deal. Then when you want to scuff sand that, we just need a little sanding sponge that'll conform to that shape. In order to scuff sand this, do a second coat, scuff sand it, do a third coat in order to get that. And then of course here and here, we can go right back to the squeegee that we were using earlier on that flat stack. But it's a great question because we're about to look at an application where you could want to do a lot of this. A lot of this meaning needing to get into this kind of a detail on a door. Here's where I'm going next. If you're the proud owner of a home that was built in the 70s, it's not impossible that your kitchen cabinets are oak with what I lovingly call baby poop brown stain on the cabinets. This kind of golden oak color was so popular in the 70s. This is what was on the cabinets in our house, which was built in the 70s. What's very common today is people are leaving the cabinets up and painting over them. If all you do is take this existing, scuff sand it, and paint it, there's a big negative to that, and I'm going to show you in a second what it looks like. The negative is that, remember, we've got these highs and lows. Those highs and lows are going to telegraph through the paint you put on the surface. So when you're done, it's not going to look like nice new painted cabinets. It's going to look like old oak baby poop brown cabinets that you put paint on, because you can still see all the grain through them. If that's the look you want, then cool, you're good to go. If you want them to be a contiguous surface when they're done, a contiguous painted surface when they're done, then we have to take another step. Let's look then at this. This is what I'm talking about. So on this board, it's obviously all one red oak board, started just like that one. It's got the baby poop brown stain on it and a top coat of lacquer. On the top surface, I used grain filler. On the bottom, I didn't. Now I think I'm going to quit trying to show you this because it's hard to see. When we get back to the tight camera, I'll show you how evident the grain that telegraphed through is right there. We're going to use grain filler again, but it's different. This is the other stuff I was talking about when I started. And again, if you're interested in trying this particular form of grain filler, we've got both of these sourced for you in the description with the video. So this stuff is called their cabinet grain filler. It's got more solids to it. So this is going to give us, you'll see it in a second when I put it on here, it's going to be really evident how it's filling in the low spots. Let me quit talking and we'll just do it. Same approach. And look at, that's the deal right there, which is as I squeegee, it's pulling it off the high spots and it's leaving it in the low spots. Because it's white, it's really, really evident just how many low spots we have on this thing. Same deal, cross grain to start. Keep in mind it dries by evaporation, so you don't have to make it a foot race, but you don't want to dally. So what I did with this board, I stained it, top coated it with lacquer, scuff sanded it, and you can really see here the highs and lows in the grain that we have. After it's scuff sanded, it's ready for grain filler. Then pull it off the surface. And like I said, this part of what's cool about this demo is it makes it really obvious why we use grain filler. Look at where the grain filler is and look at where it's not. Low spots, high spots. Clean up my tools. And then I go back to my sample board, see if this is evident. What we've got here, that's what it looked like to start with. I grain filled only this half. On this half where it was painted, get you in the right spot if I can. Oh, right there. Oh, I hit it. Moving too fast. There. Wow. Okay. There's the original grain of that telegraphing through the paint. Same angle of looking. No. There's no evidence of the grain telegraphing through because on this side, it got grain filled. Same procedure. Get the first coat on, let it dry, scuff sand, second coat as needed. Like I said earlier, my test on that is run my fingers across it, and when it's right, it's going to feel smooth. When it needs more, you're still going to feel those highs and lows that are telegraphing through your finish. Then once you have the final coat of the white on there, then you're ready for paint. Give it a little scuff sand and then paint as you would normally paint. When I was talking about the door, I said we're going to kind of need to know this later. So if you're doing how to get in the OG profile, if you're doing a full kitchen, the big K sides, you're going to do exactly like I did here. You can use your spatula, you can use your plastic putty knife to spread that. When you do the doors, you'll have to do it like I did with a sponge or something to apply it into those details. Same with the raised panel door. To work it into the profile of the raised panel door, you're going to use something like a sponge to wipe it on, to apply it, and then wipe off the excess. Scuff sanding, same procedure. The difference on paint grade projects between no grain filler and grain filler is absolutely huge. I think the deal with the white is it's got more solids to it, which makes sense. So it fills a little faster because we've got more solids here than in the clear. And as a result, you may not need as many coats from the paint grade stuff, as you did from the clear. Looking around at props to see if there's anything else I meant to say. Couple questions. What do you do when it's 25 below for entertainment? No, nobody really asked that. I just said that. I'll tell you what you do when it's 25 below. You take a cup full of boiling water and you throw it in the air and it instantly turns into a really cool cloud. It's fun. Okay. Philip says, I'm using oils like walrus oil or Odie's on my bowl turnings. What would your recommendation be here? So I think somebody previously asked, could you do this on a bowl or pens, that kind of thing? And I think it would be the same application, which would be sand that turning to wherever you normally sand your turnings, put on the grain filler, treat it just like the clear, and then treat it just like I did here. Let it dry, lightly scuff sand it, do another coat as needed, and then your top coat over that. What I would do, because this is a little weird, I've not tried it. I've done a lot of the furniture and cabinet work with this product. I haven't tried it on my turnings. I would give Aquacoat a call and say, this is what I plan on doing. Is there a hole in the system here? Is there anything here anything else I should consider? And they're the experts on the product. So I would just take the time to double check with them. But it's the same as me putting, whichever board that was. It's the same as me putting linseed oil on that red oak plywood, right? You're using an oil type product like boiled linseed oil and going over the grain filler. So I think it would work, but it'd be worth a double check. Kizzy says, what's the consistency after dry? Does it feel chalky? Great question. No. So this is more akin to a sanding sealer, if you're familiar with that. If you're coming to finishing out of the lacquer world, you probably commonly put sanding sealer down first, light sanding, and then lacquer over the top. Seal coat, if you're using that, is basically a similar approach. So once it's on and it's dry and it's sanded, this one, I guess this is the one I did for you. Once that's scuff sanded, it just feels like a smooth surface. It definitely is not chalky. It just feels ready for finish. There's zero chalkiness to it at all. Fred says, I'm making a tabletop out of white oak that has a few knot holes that I wanted to fill. I first used seal coat and then used grain filler to smooth out the grain and fill the small knot holes. I found the grain filler, Aquacoat, was shrinking as it dried and leaving a small divot after multiple coats. Is that normal or is this user error? So I don't think grain filler. So I would again default to do a double check with Aquacoat. But grain filler and not filler are two different things. So what I would have probably done is I would have dealt with the knots early in the game. Pre seal coat, I would have dealt with the knots. And then I would have seal coated. Then I would have grain filled. Then I would top coat. Because I think there is a reasonable expectation of what this stuff will fill. And then there's maybe a void that's too big, which is maybe what you're running into. But I would give them a double check. And that's a great question of how large a void can I expect to fill with this? But again, it's not wood dough, and it's not epoxy or CA glue that you might normally use to fill a knot hole. It's really designed, I would say, on more of a microscopic level to get in there and fill pores, not fill holes. But give them a jingle and double check them. And Kizzy says, I'm going to boil water now. So it doesn't have to be 25 below to get that cool experiment to work. Krista and I looked it up, and it was like when it's like 0 out Fahrenheit, or I think even a little warmer than that, it'll still work. It's pretty fun. What types of wood would you not use this on? Great question. I don't use this on every project I do. Sorry, Aquacoat. But what I do is if it's a naturally closed grained wood, I go straight to my normal finishing process, which is dewax shellac, seal coat, and a water-based top coat. So I don't use it on walnut, maple, cherry. Those I consider all pretty close grained. I do use it on anytime I'm in red oak, mahogany. Birch is kind of right on the edge. Birch is going to benefit from this because it's leaning a little bit toward open grain. So what I would do if I were you, remember I talked earlier about practicing, experimenting. A great Saturday in the shop would be get a little scrap of mahogany, get a little scrap of red oak, walnut, cherry, maple, and do what I did here. Grain filled half, don't grain fill half, and then put your normal top coat on. And you will, even in the closed grained woods, you will get a better top coat effect when you've used grain fill. Part of the question is just sort of like, well, how much of a gain am I making? Huge in open grained woods like red oak, stark. Less stark in closed grained woods, but your mileage may vary. So, and your aesthetic may vary. You can't overuse it. There's nothing wrong with using it all the time. And a way to look at it would be maybe if you're doing a big walnut table and it's a tabletop and it's legs and rails, do the tabletop because that's easy to grain fill and it's the big, most obvious surface. But if you don't want to, don't grain fill the legs and the rails because they're not as, you don't see it as much, the top coat effect, as you do on the top. So, but really the way to do this would be spend the time in your shop experimenting with the stuff that you use the most and do a sample board where it's partially grain filled, partially not, and top coat the whole thing and then see what you like best. And you may find that for you, the results are stark enough all the time that you just want to use it all the time. It does, even on a detailed surface, it's so easy to work with. It's so easy to apply that it's really no harm, no foul to use it all the time. And it dries so fast that it's not adding bazillions of hours to your finishing time. Kizzy says, is it water-based? I've been using DAP 3-in-1 sealer. It's very chalky. I'd like to try something different. So yeah, both of these, whether you use the underpaint one, that's the white one, or the clear one. Hopefully I'm grabbing the right ones. Whoops, I grabbed the wrong one. The white one or the clear one, yeah, they're both water-based. So cleanup is easy, like the spatula thing. Wipe it on, while it's still wet on here, run it to the sink, wash it off. For complex builds, would you use filler prior to assembly? So if it's a project or wood that calls for filler, yes. Like I said a second ago, you can't go wrong. You're never going to go wrong using it, because there'll always be some gain in the finish that you're putting on as a top coat. All right. Well, I think we're there on questions. End of the day, I'm going to say it again. It's really, really important with all your woodworking, whether that's cutting dovetails or resawing, especially with finishing, to practice this stuff before you use this stuff. And I don't just mean this stuff. I mean finishes, techniques. You get a new sprayer, you get a new brush, you get a whatever. So it's actually a fun science experiment to set up a bunch of different stuff. Grain fill some, don't grain fill some, top coat it all, see what you get. And I think that's about all I know. So thanks for watching in the middle of a cold, wintry day. And I will see you, what month are we in? January. I will see you in February when we do this again.